Alright, today we're going to be reading Flipped, some excerpts from Flipped by Wendelin van Draanen, from the chapter Diving Under. All I've ever wanted is for Julie Baker to leave me alone, for her to back off, just give me some space. It all started the summer before second grade when our moving van pulled into her neighborhood, and since we're now about done with the 8th grade, that, my friend, makes more than half a decade of strategic avoidance and social discomfort. She didn't just barge into my life. She barged and shoved and wedged her way into my life. Did we invite her to get into our moving van and start climbing all over boxes? No, but that's exactly what she did, taking over and showing off like only Julie Baker can. My dad tried to stop her. "Hey," he says as she's catapulting herself on board. "What are you doing? You're getting mud everywhere." So true, too. Her shoes were like caked with the stuff. She didn't hop out, though. Instead, she planted her rear end on the floor and started pushing a big box with her feet. "Don't you want some help?" She glanced my way. "It sure looks like you need it." I didn't like the implication, and even though my dad had been tossing me the same sort of look all week, I could tell he didn't like this girl either. "Hey, don't do that," he warned her. There are some really valuable things in that box." "Oh, well, how about this one?" She scoots over to a box labeled Lennox and looks my way again. "We should push it together." "No, no, no," my dad says, then pulls her up by the arm. "Why don't you run along home? Your mother's probably wondering where you are." This was the beginning of my soon-to-become acute awareness that the girl cannot take a hint, of any kind. Does she zip on home like a kid should when they've been invited to leave? No. She says, "Oh, my mom knows where I am. She said it was fine." Then she points across the street and says, "We live right over there." My father looks to where she's pointing and mutters, "Oh boy." Then he looks at me and winks as he says, "Bryce, isn't it time for you to go inside and help your mother?" I knew right off that this was a ditch play. I didn't think about it until later, but ditch wasn't a play I'd run with my dad before. Face it, pulling a ditch is not like something discussed with dads. It's like against parental law to tell your kid it's okay to ditch someone, no matter how annoying or muddy they might be. But there he was, putting the play in motion, and man, he didn't have to wink twice. I smiled and said, "Sure thing," then jumped off the lift gate and headed for my new front door. I heard her coming after me, but I couldn't believe it. Maybe it just sounded like she was chasing me. Maybe she was really going the other way. But before I got the nerve to look, she blasted right past me, grabbing my arm, yanking me along. This was too much. I planted myself and was about to tell her to get lost when the weirdest thing happened. I was making this big windmill motion to break away from her, but somehow on the downswing, my hand wound up tangling into hers. I couldn't believe it. There I was, holding the mud monkey's hand. I tried to shake her off, but she just clamped on tight and yanked me along, saying, "Come on." My mom came out of the house and immediately got the world's sappiest look on her face. "Well, hello," she says to Julie. "Hi." I'm still trying to pull free, but the girl's got me in a death grip. My mom's grinning, looking at her hands and my fiery red face. "And what's your name, honey?" "Juliana Baker. I live right over there," she says, pointing with her unoccupied hand. "Well, I see you've met my son," she says, still grinning away. "Uh-huh." Finally, I break free and do the only manly thing available when you're 7 years old. I dive behind my mother. Mom puts her arm around me and says, "Bryce, honey, why don't you show Juliana around the house?" I flash her help and warning signals with every part of my body, but she's not receiving. Then she shakes me off and says, "Go on." Julie would have tramped right in if my mother hadn't noticed her shoes and told her to take them off. And after those were off, my mom told her that her dirty socks had to go too. Julie wasn't embarrassed, not a bit. She just peeled them off and left them in a crusty heap on our porch. I didn't exactly give her a tour. I locked myself in the bathroom instead. And after about 10 minutes of yelling back at her that no, I wasn't coming out anytime soon, things got quiet out in the hall. Another 10 minutes went by before I got the nerve to peek out the door. No Julie. I snuck out and looked around, and yes, she was gone. Not a very sophisticated ditch, but hey, I was only 7. My troubles were far from over, though. Every day she came back over and over again. "Can Bryce play?" I could hear her asking from my hiding place behind the couch. "Is he ready yet?" One time she even cut across the yard and looked through my window. I spotted her in the nick of time and dove under my bed. But man, that right there tells you something about Julie Baker. She's got no concept of personal space, no respect for privacy. The world is her playground. And watch out below, Julie's on the slide. From the chapter Flipped. The first day I met Bryce Losky, I flipped. Honestly, one look at him and I became a lunatic. It's his eyes. Something in his eyes. They're blue, and framed in the blackness of his lashes they're dazzling. Absolutely breathtaking. It's been over 6 years now, and I learned long ago to hide my feelings. But oh, those first days, those first years! I thought I would die from wanting to be with him. 2 days before the second grade is when it started, although the anticipation began weeks before, ever since my mother had told me that there was a family with a boy my age moving into the new house right across the street. Soccer camp had ended, and I'd been so bored because there was nobody, absolutely nobody in the neighborhood to play with. Oh, there were kids, but every one of them was older. That was dandy for my brothers, but what it left me was home alone. My mother was there, but she had better things to do than kick a soccer ball around, so she said anyway. At the time, I didn't think there was anything better than kicking a soccer ball around, especially not the likes of laundry or dishes or vacuuming. Well, my mother didn't agree. And the danger of being home alone with her was that she'd recruit me to help her wash or dust or vacuum, and she wouldn't tolerate the dribbling of a soccer ball around the house as I moved from chore to chore. To play it safe, I waited outside for weeks, just in case the new neighbors moved in. Early. Literally, it was weeks. I entertained myself by playing soccer with our dog, Champ. Mostly, he'd just block, because a dog can't exactly kick and score. But once in a while, he'd dribble with his nose. The scent of a ball must overwhelm a dog, though, because Champ would eventually try to chomp it, then lose the ball to me. When the Loskys' moving van finally arrived, everyone in my family was happy. Little Juliana was finally going to have a playmate. My mother, being the truly sensible adult that she is, made me wait for more than an hour before going over to meet them. "Give them a chance to stretch their legs, Juliana," she'd say. "They'll want some time to adjust." She wouldn't even let me watch from the yard. "I know you, sweetheart. Somehow that ball will wind up in their yard and you'll just have to go retrieve it." So I watched from the window, and every few minutes I'd ask, "Now?" And she'd say, "Give them a little while longer, would you?" Then the phone rang, and the minute I was sure she was good and preoccupied, I tugged on her sleeve and asked, "Now?" She nodded and whispered, "Okay, but take it easy. I'll be over there in a minute." I was too excited not to charge across the street, but I did try very hard to be civilized once I got to the moving van. I stood outside looking in for a record-breaking length of time, which was hard because there he was, about halfway back, my new, sure-to-be best friend, Bryce Losky. Bryce wasn't really doing much of anything. He was more hanging back, watching his father move boxes onto the liftgate. I remember feeling sorry for Mr. Losky, because he looked worn out, moving boxes all by himself. I also remember that he and Bryce were wearing matching turquoise polo shirts, which I thought was really cute, really nice. When I couldn't stand it any longer, I called, "Hi," into the van, which made Bryce jump, and then, quick as a cricket, he started pushing a box like he'd been working all along. I could tell from the way Bryce was acting so guilty that he was supposed to be moving boxes, but he was sick of it. He'd probably been moving things for days. It was easy to see that he needed a rest. He needed some juice, something. It was also easy to see that Mr. Losky wasn't about to let him quit. He was going to keep on moving boxes around until he collapsed, and by then Bryce might be dead. Dead before he'd had the chance to move in. The tragedy of it catapulted me into the moving van. I had to help. I had to save him. When I got to his side to help him shove a box forward, the poor boy was so exhausted that he just moved aside and let me take over. Mr. Losky didn't want me to help, but at least I saved Bryce. I'd been in the moving van all of 3 minutes when his dad sent him off to help his mother unpack things inside the house. I chased Bryce up the walkway, and that's when everything changed. You see, I caught up to him and grabbed his arm, trying to stop him so maybe we could play a little before he got trapped inside, and the next thing I know, he's holding my hand, looking right into my eyes. My heart stopped. It just stopped beating. And for the first time in my life, I had that feeling. You know, like the world is moving all around you, all beneath you, all inside you, and you're floating. Floating in midair. And the only thing keeping you from drifting away is the other person's eyes. They're connected to yours by some invisible physical force, and they hold you fast while the rest of the world swirls and twirls and falls completely away. I almost got my first kiss that day, I'm sure of it. But then his mother came out the front door, and he was so embarrassed that his cheeks turned completely red. And the next thing you know, he's hiding in the bathroom. I was waiting for him to come out when his sister Lynetta saw me in the hallway. She seemed big and mature to me, and since she wanted to know what was going on, I told her a little bit about it. I shouldn't have, though, because she wiggled the bathroom doorknob and started teasing Bryce something fierce. "Hey, baby brother," she called through the door. "There's a hot chick out here waiting for you. What's the matter? Afraid she's got cooties?" It was so embarrassing. I yanked on her arm and told her to stop it, but she wouldn't, so finally I just left. I found my mother outside talking to Mrs. Losky. Mom had given her the beautiful lemon bundt cake that was supposed to be our dessert that night. The powdered sugar looked soft and white, and the cake was still warm, sending sweet lemon smells into the air. My mouth was watering just looking at it, but it was in Mrs. Losky's hands, and I knew there was no getting it back. All I could do was try to eat up the smells while I listened to the two of them discuss grocery stores and the weather forecast. After that, Mom and I went home. It was very strange. I hadn't gotten to play with Bryce at all. All I knew was that his eyes were a dizzying blue, that he had a sister who was not to be trusted, and that he'd almost kissed me.